Um, so I want to welcome comrades and friends on this. Well, I'm talking from Rhode Island in the U.S. and my name is Robert Montgomery, as Davey said, and just want to start with saying this is a particularly auspicious day. I'm old enough to remember 60 years ago, in October 1962. I was a bit too young to understand the magnitude of the moment of the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis, but I did get what was going on with adults where they thought that the world was coming to an end. And I don't think it's going too far to say that we might be on the brink of a similar moment today. Okay. So I'm speaking to you on behalf of classconscious.org. We're a small Marxist website based in Australia and the US. A three-person editorial board has between us a combined 70 years of involvement in the Trotskyist movement. We published work on the character of the Chinese state, Marxist crisis theory, the threat of war and fascism, a history of policing, a long history of policing in the West, the fight for zero COVID, cultural reviews on books and films, etc. And all our material can be accessed at classconscious.org. For today's purposes, I want to refer you to two recent documents that Comrade Davey Heller and myself published. The first is Setting the Record Straight on Imperialism, Russia, Ukraine, and the US. The second is by Davey Heller, Imperialism Harnesses the Anti-War Movement to Prepare for World War III. I'll be paraphrasing these documents and I'll have to keep my comments within the time limits. So firstly, we see today's events within the context of a very deep crisis of world capitalism. Marx's law of value is asserting itself in long-term falling rates of profit on a world scale, and most acutely in the US nerve center of imperialism itself. The normal thirst for surplus value right now has turned into an insatiable hunger, a ravenous hunger on the part of imperialism for increased profitability. And this is driving the US and its allies to divide the world again in search of expanded markets for the export of capital and to capture for itself an increased share of the available surplus value produced. In response to its crisis of valorization, US capitalism is intensifying its attack on the working class both at home and abroad. Today, it is positioning itself geopolitically against Russia. The aim of the war is to reduce Russia to neo-colonial status, to open its vast mineral, agricultural, and energy resources to unhindered exploitation by imperialist finance capital. The ongoing mobilization, massive mobilization of military and economic power against Russia right now is reminiscent of nothing so much as the Nazi Operation Barbarossa of 80 years ago. The regional war in Ukraine cannot be separated from the US drive to crush both its strategic rivals, Russia and China, in order to maintain its declining global economic hegemony. And US hegemony is under threat, both from its own internal contradictions and from the rising economic strength of China. Recently, the US has been stymied by a combination of neo-colonial and lesser developed bourgeois regimes acting in concert, as we saw in Syria. Having failed in its regime change operation in Syria, largely due to Russian and Iranian military assistance, the US has decided to remove once and for all the Russian thorn from its side. The inner logic of events is unfolding towards a massive military confrontation between NATO and Russia that could draw in all major powers and result in the specter of a nuclear holocaust. The conflict in Ukraine is not between poor little Ukraine and Russia. To be clear, This is a proxy war between imperialism led by the US and Russia. We once again see, as we did in 1914, a peace movement that supports imperialist war. The demand for action to save Ukraine, to stand with Ukraine, gives political cover to the war, as do all the anti-war groups campaigning under the Third Camp banner, neither Moscow nor NATO, no to NATO, no to Moscow. To demand peace in Ukraine is simply to join the chorus demanding that Russia and China submit to the Pax Americana and open themselves up to the untrammeled looting of their material, natural, and human resources. The mistaken assumption of the peace movement is that war can be avoided by allowing US and Western imperialism to exploit the world's resources without limit. This is a delusion. It's an absolute delusion. The only real anti-war position is to fight US imperialism's effort to dominate the globe, including by encircling and dismembering Russia, and to support the right of all countries in the crosshairs of imperialism to defend themselves. We at Class Conscious extend critical support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is because we classify Russia not as imperialist, but as a nationalist and dependent bourgeois regime in conflict with imperialism. We support Russia's right to defend its national sovereignty against imperialist aggression on its borders, up to and including the use of military force. We extend military but no political support to the reactionary nationalist Putin regime. We call for the Russian working class to oust Putin and the oligarchs he represents. Should Russia be defeated by or capitulate to imperialism, it will mean a double chain around the necks of the working class of Russia as they toil under the dual domination of their own ruling class and that of imperialist capital as well. Today, the same imperialist knife at the throat of Russia is at the same time as also menacing Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. The ultimate target of this military and economic eruption is China. And as always, the butcher's knife is at the throats of all the working masses of the global South. We believe a military victory by Russia against imperialism would be a blow against imperialism everywhere. I suspect that these sentiments are shared by those here who agree on the high stakes involved in imperialism's proxy war in Ukraine. So once again, comrades, the question is before us, as it was in 1914. What is to be done, or conversely, what is to be undone? As all the rotten opportunist groups bend the knee before bourgeois public opinion, as they give their objective support to the imperialist onslaught against Russia, it's time to ask, do we need to call a new Zimmerwald or issue a new Zimmerwald manifesto for the 21st century? In the teeth of the ongoing onslaught against Russia, it's our hope that we can move forward from this meeting in a united front of all revolutionary forces to call for the defeat of imperialism without qualification or equivocation of any sort whatsoever. To conclude, for an end to war, violence, and fascism, for an abundant life for all, forward to the world socialist revolution, and from classconscious.org, say thank you for having us here today.